Folks, thanks for tuning in again today for the Week in Review and a look at the week ahead, news that matters, and hopefully giving you some background on some items that you can feel strongly about or you can dispute, but it'll give you food for thought and good discussion points that you can use launching into discussions with people on the week ahead. We're going to jump right into it now. Of course, we're sticking to the high-level items that we think are going to send a trend. So look for, in Canadian news and on the political scene, you're going to see there's been in the last week a fair bit of criticism towards the federal Liberal government and Prime Minister Carney in terms of he's been doing a lot of talking, a lot of traveling, and are there any specifics that can be derived from all of this? I'm going to give him a point and a thumbs up where he has linked arms with a conservative premier, Premier Ford in Ontario, in terms of saying they're going to just do all they can to blow away the regulatory overburden, as we call it, on projects so that things can get shovels in the ground faster. I think he's sincere about that, and any talk in that direction will send a signal to the regulators to say, let's just do stuff that makes sense and we don't want things bogging down. So I would say for him, he's going to want to put some proof in the pudding of what he's just announced last week. This week, look for some clarity on some housing announcements, maybe some infrastructure announcements, but showing that it's not just rhetoric. And I think that's a good thing. Let's see how it rolls out. We saw in the U.S., wow, I don't know if you tuned into that State of the Union, or sorry, State of the country message from President Trump. Some people have said that, listening to President Trump is kind of like watching a machine gun firing out the data and the high energy of it. And this was certainly the case. He didn't waste a lot of time with unnecessary discussion. He just got right to the facts. So he's reflecting that I think he's sensing he doesn't like some of the reporting that goes on that says the economy's in terrible shape, and he was showing how it's in good shape. One thing it did do, for those who are looking for talking points, it certainly gave people talking points. And he, once again, as only he can do, and as he continues to do, he forces the conversation. So if the Democrats did not want to look at the positive aspects of what's going on in the economy, and there are positive aspects along with negative, but when you only focus on one or the other just to try and shoot down your adversary, you're going to lose credibility. So what he did with his speech was he forced Democrats again to repeat the talking points and then say why they didn't believe in them. So he got double coverage that way. There is always a method in terms of what some people might say is his approach. The other thing that came out, it's just as if, right on time, even without being given any kind of notice, all of a sudden on a dime, there's this turn in, you get all the reporting about the MAGA group and the MAGA movement. Is it shattering or is it falling apart, or are there cracks in it? And all of a sudden, 2 to 3 days, nonstop reporting about how the Democrats have plunged to their lowest popularity levels, like since democracy was invented, it almost sounds like. But really horrific numbers for Democrats in terms of how people are just tuning out their extreme agenda items. So watch for more of that. Watch for the Democrats in the U.S. trying to recover from all the reporting about their dropping numbers. And the other thing you're going to see is now President Trump, that he's come out with those strong numbers, or what he sees as strong numbers. Now, again, this week ahead, look for examples. He's going to want to put that on the table, he and his administration. Examples of what they're doing in defense, examples of what they're doing on trade. And let's see what kind of impact that has. But he's going to want to put clear examples, just as I said, Prime Minister Carney's going to want to do in the week ahead. In the European community, we're seeing a real push and pull going on because European countries are being forced to make alignments. And many of them don't like the fact that President Trump criticizes them for being weak, overly regulated, and overly taxed. So they kind of say, well, maybe we'll just play more with China. But then, as we'll see in a minute, as you get China saying it's going to be more and more aggressive, Now you get European leaders really trying to decide who they're going to align with. And in many European countries, they have to contend with what's called by mainstream media the far right policies. When someone says something is far right in the mainstream media, maybe you want to take a look at it. It might just mean it's common sense, but I'll leave that to your judgment. So you see European countries, they're going to be forced to change. They're going to be forced to say who they majorly align with. Is it China or is it the US? Watch for some statements, some moves on that front. And for all governments right now, there's this real trend, and those of you who are among our younger cohort that watches and listens to this, and I appreciate you and the comments you give me from the younger side of the equation, I need that. But there's this real understanding among political parties that there are revolutions or semi-revolutions taking place in countries around the world just based on anger coming from, the Gen Z crowd or anybody under 40. These are the folks who are supercharged by their devices and by AI and by the news they're getting there. And they're literally rising up in the streets in many cases and appearing like a revolutionary factor and forcing governments in some cases to flee their own government buildings, even countries like Nepal, if you looked at some of the recent upheaval there. And it's got governments that are in power, it's got them quite jittery. Are they responding? Here's the problem. Most of it, or a lot of it, though it's understandable why younger generations especially would react to what they see as gatekeeping by the older crowd and selfishness and hoarding things for themselves at the older levels. Yeah, I get that. They're understanding that. But if it's revolution just based on anger, it's not going to yield good fruit. It's not going to yield a healthier, more prosperous, or more flourishing situation. Revolution only... a revolt that's only built because it's a revolt actually becomes revolting. So governments are really watching carefully there, and shows the real need for all political parties. If you really believe in the principles you stand in, and you think that's going to make for greater opportunities for people, there needs to be more of a need to share information and educate the younger cohort into, for instance, why socialism does not work. It truly doesn't. It's been proven for over 100 years. It causes increased poverty, it causes increased misery, but that's not what the Gen Zs are hearing. They're not hearing any of that, and they've got to hear some intelligent, reasoned discourse on that so that they don't keep demanding systems that are going to wind up being more harmful. So as we continue to look at that, let's take a little peek at some of the, I call it some of the small stories that emerge in any particular country that can be like a metaphor of a larger problem, small cracks that lead to looking at some of the crackpots. So I'm going to zero in on, in Canada, the province of Quebec in this regard. And look, I love the province of Quebec, lived there for many years, was raised there, learned how to speak French there. But Quebec's history is much more to the European regulatory model in terms of tending to be over-regulated on everything. The legal system in Quebec is built on what's called the Napoleonic Code. In other words, the difference there between that and what we call common law is that the Napoleonic Code, coming from Napoleon and coming from France, outlines very, very specifically in minute detail all the things you cannot do as a citizen, and it gets quite overbearing. Whereas what started as the Western or British-based and then American-based system is based on common law, what the law has in common with long-standing understandings. And that says basically, unless the law specifically says you can't do it, you can go ahead and do it. So it's much more open, a little more freewheeling, and it leads, as many of us believe, to more prosperous, more flourishing society that is not as heavily regulated. So the metaphor for this, just in the last week, and there's been some reporting on this, guidelines have come out to schools, and what they're saying is it's guidelines for the type of play that's going on in the schoolyard on those snow mounds that always build up especially in Quebec during the winter months and in other provinces too, especially where you have the snow blowers that come down the street and they blow the snow into big piles to keep the streets clear. Those piles become wonderful mountains of conquest. And we all grew up, ever since snow was invented, with games like King of the Hill. Sorry if I'm using a male symbol there, but we called it King of the Hill or Champ of the Mountain, whatever it might be. But the game was very simple. You would, recess would come along and you'd run outside. First one to get to the top of that snow mound would stand there and try and defend it as long as possible from the invading hordes of young climbers trying to get them off, get up there and knock them off that snow mound, and they become the champion, usually for not very long, a minute or two before other young rebels were climbing that snow mountain. So a lot of fun, created tons of fun, relatively low in terms of injury, the odd bleeding nose maybe, or a cut lip. But no, that's not good enough to leave alone. Now there's regulations being suggested for those snow mounds. There's even some suggested heights. They should be starting in at about the 1.8 meter mark in terms of height. Well, most kids couldn't tell you a meter from a foot from a yard. And I'm trying to get a picture of teachers going out there with tape measures trying to measure the height of a snow mound, even suggesting that the slope should be about 24% angle on those snow mounds so that people don't get hurt, and suggesting you should wear a helmet if you're going to be playing in that particular game of King of the Mountain. So a little bit, it might sound a little bit crazy, but the other thing that's being suggested is, look, it's just clear, and there's nothing stereotypical about this, it's mainly boys who played that game, girls being a lot more sensible and doing more cooperative things in the snow, and it's the boys who were running up those hills trying to knock the other guy off there. There's even suggestions in the regulations that on a snow hill, you get little tracks forming, and some of the tracks up the hill can be more dangerous than others, so you should avoid the more dangerous track. But every little boy will tell you, no, you run up the more dangerous track because that's where you catch the guy by surprise, is at the top of the hill, and you knock him out. And so already there's some reflection that this is a continuation. I'm not taking this view. I'm just saying it's a continuation of the theory that so many social scientists are trying to dumb down or go against nature and suffocate some of the impulses that young boys have. Obviously, I clearly believe boys and girls are equal in terms of being citizens and human beings, and they also have different strengths, and sometimes physical strength is part of it, and it should not be subdued. But because of the fact it's mainly boys who play this game, it seems to be, some are suggesting it's just one more attempt to try and subvert or smother some of the male characteristics that we are known for good or for bad. You know, it brings to mind the famous, you can Google this or check it out on chat, the famous Harvard experiment where 4-year-olds in a preschool setting, the teachers there were continually exasperated by the fact that the toys would all be put out in the middle of the floor, and the boys would gravitate to things like trucks and tractors and cars. The girls would gravitate to things like dolls. And this was especially infuriating to the social scientists, so it was suggested seclude this a bit, fence it off so that the boys would not have the choice, but they would learn what it is to cuddle a doll, and put those tractors or choo-choo trains and things like that in the girls' area, and they would want to learn how to drive tractors uphill and push dirt around. In fact, what they began to observe was these young girls would take up these toys and see them as quite adorable and wind up hugging them and holding them close and cuddling them. Whereas the boys who were given the dolls would look at the dolls for a few minutes, and it wouldn't be too long before the boys would be smashing each other over the head with the dolls. So that kind of confounded the Harvard experimenters, but just a realization that there are some differences, and realizing those actually helps us work together. So there we are, using the Quebec example of how regulations can get insane and out of control, and we need to step in and show some common sense. Well, the ongoing Epstein file revelations, the Democrats, again, are backing off somewhat in terms of their demands. There's now, I don't know, it's the thousands of pages have been released tens of thousands of photographs, and the only ones that seem to be emerging that are of any interest to anyone are the political ones. That's understandable. And notably this week, it's more photographs of famous Democrats, Bill Clinton and others, and whether it's in a hot tub or wherever it might be. And so the Democrats backing off somewhat in terms of their demands for the full revelation of the Epstein files. We'll continue to watch for that this week in terms of if that's going to fade or not. And watch for the effect, whether it's going to be this week or right into the new year, of Americans receiving something I don't know that they've received before, and that's huge tax refund checks, as Donald Trump will be making the case that because so many companies now from outside of the U.S. have had to pay billions and billions in terms of tariffs, and I'll say again, I am not a big fan of tariffs. I don't think they work in the long run. However, for the U.S., the companies from other countries have had to pay untold billions, actually told billions of dollars to gain access to the U.S. market. And President Trump has said that is money that truly belongs to Americans, suggesting Americans could be getting checks, maybe something in the range of $2,000 for every adult. Let's see if that happens, and let's see if that develops. As we look at the U.S. continuing to exert itself, and they're getting a lot of criticism, it's ongoing, exert itself with the blockade on Venezuela, and the U.S. policy, it flows from something called the Monroe Doctrine, a former president of the U.S. who realized that they would have to, the United States, to protect its own interests and to protect itself, would have to have a positive influence in South American countries. It's kind of a rejuvenation, I guess you might say, of that, a blockade around Venezuela. And it's President Trump saying countries that are extreme socialists, that export drugs, the deadly drugs that are killing thousands and thousands of Americans, and guns and bandits and bad people themselves, and now breaking the oil sanctions. Now it's known that Venezuela has many oil tankers that go and bring oil from the Iranian regime to places like Cuba and others. So they continue to empower Iran to be that major exporter of terror around the world. The U.S. is saying we're not having anything of it, and they're showing more muscle. But at the same time now, China, just this week, released a policy paper on their view of South America and the Caribbean, and it's like they're drawing their line in the sand, and they're saying they are going to be pursuing more presence, a more robust presence in South America and in the Caribbean. So watch for some of the response to that in the week ahead. This last week, my wife and I and others had the joy of attending a menorah lighting ceremony, and it was fantastic. And we went there in solidarity with our Jewish friends and the Jewish community, and really in response to what happened, the horrific events that took place in Australia specifically, but are continuing to take place in an increased way against Jewish people and the Jewish community, Jewish institutions, and of course Israel itself. You know, it was a wonderful time. I had a great time. The Chabad that had put on this event was an outside event. They invited everybody in the community. Lots of amazingly fun stuff to do with kids, and an explanation of what the menorah was all about. It was a fabulous time. The food was great. Everybody enjoyable. If you look at some of the pictures I took there, the inevitable and unfortunate backdrop, if you look carefully, yes, there was a large vehicle there that was a bomb squad unit. There were tactical officers, SWAT team officers around the perimeter. They were tactfully posted. It didn't appear overbearing, but they were there. Fire trucks were there, and in some of the ladders, there were people up in the bucket high up that could view the ongoing festivities from below. So it's kind of a tragic reminder that this reluctance of imams in the Islamist community to speak out against Islamist terrorists, the reluctance of that is part of the reason that some of these terrorists think they can just, that they have some kind of divine unction and divine favor by going and slaughtering Jews. And as I've said before, until I'm talking Islamic now, Muslim leaders in the imams around the world are saying there's no paradise for terrorist killers. There's no paradise. There's no 72 virgins. waiting for people who blow up other people and kill and cause this mayhem until they really start saying that. There are some notable exceptions, but still across the spectrum, we have imams speaking up against that. I'm concerned about where it's all going to go. Anyway, if you have the opportunity to attend a menorah lighting, do it. It's a wonderful event. On the entertainment front, in case any of you might have thought that Lady Gaga has gone away, she certainly has not. Entertainment Weekly has named her as one of the entertainments of the year, primarily for her album called, appropriately, I guess, Mayhem, and sort of indicative of her ongoing huge popularity and fame. She just did a free concert in Rio, which just, in terms of numbers of people and energy and everything, it was just apparently unimaginable. So Lady Gaga and Mayhem not going away. On the other side of that, you might want to say, the other side of that spectrum, a little less mayhem and a little more harmony. We see Angel Studios, which runs faith-based films, continuing to break through, not just break through, but to come out with one hit after another. So their recent film about David, even in pre-theater sales, has already hit 14 million, and it's going to go well beyond that. So it's the anticipation of its release, and actually the trailers are pretty great. Of course, it's talking about historically, as a historic fact, the life of King David in Israel. And big platforms like Amazon and like Lionsgate are now looking at Angel Studios and realizing how many people want to see film and entertainment that's based on faith-based, even biblical values. And so they're moving more in that direction. And going along with that is the series Forge. Many of you have been watching that. It's a $40 million hit on Netflix. It's in the top 5 of Netflix right now. The seasons continue. So people, and it's fitting of this season, looking for seasons of joy, looking for seasons of stability, and looking for expressions of faith. Give that some thought over the weekend as we look ahead to the week, and see you on Monday. Thanks. All the best.